Is there any limit to how bad a champion can be? Could a champ ever be nerfed so heavily that picking them would be a bannable offense? Hello Summoners, and welcome to another ProGuides video. I'm Dan, and today we'll be talking about the 10 most nerfed champs in the history of League. Riot is always altering the game, usually pushing for minor and moderate changes that aim to balance and freshen up the meta. But some champions need more than that. Whether it's shaving off damage, removing mechanics, or just hitting them with that nerf bat several times in a row, these champs needed huge efforts to bring them down. But before we get started, here's today's question of the day. Which champ do you think needs nerfs the most, and what changes would you make? For me, I think Aphelios is still ridiculously strong, even with all his nerfs. Being a late game hyper carry, his early game could use some significant nerfs, so something like increased mana costs would be a good start. Let us know your answers in the comments below. And while you're at it, join our Discord and become part of our community, where we host coaching giveaways, tournaments, and other fun events. And don't forget to stop by at ProGuides.com, where we have live classes from the best instructors, like Zyrene, Mike Young, and Saskio, one-on-one coaching sessions from our instantly available Challenger-level coaches, and full courses on roles and champs from your favorite pro players, like Double Lift. Now, without further delay, let's jump right into the video. Even in the hardest of lanes, you're surely safe to farm under your turret and just try to survive laning phase, right? Well, to start off our list, we'll be talking about Akali in her post-VGU state. Her update saw Akali become one of the most broken champions of all time, with almost no way to counter her, and it took nerf after nerf after nerf to bring her down to a point where she is finally under control. One major problem is that even when her solo queue win rate dropped below 50%, in the hands of a pro, she was just too dominant, and in competitive play, she had such an impact that Riot had to keep removing mechanics from her kit and adjusting her damage values to put her in a manageable place. While she has had several hits to her sustain, mobility, and damage to beat her down, the largest nerf took place in two separate patches, when she lost her ability to fully obscure herself. On relaunch, there was no way to reveal Akali in her stealth. She couldn't even be targeted by turrets, and could dive her opponents while they tried to farm safely in what should have been a safe place in lane. The first big nerf to her W fixed this, making her turrets able to see her in her shroud. The second nerf came several patches later, and made it so that abilities that grant true sight, such as Lee Sin Q, would show Akali if she was hit. This added some level of counterplay to her, and along with the other slew of nerfs, would see Akali fall quite far from her spot at the top. One champ being immune under turret is one thing, but what if you couldn't even auto-attack anyone in a team fight? Our next champion has a similar story to Akali. Aurelia's old kit was dated and badly needed a tune-up. With 3 skill shots and a new mechanic, her update aimed to bring her a fresh, modern feel. Instead, she was an overloaded monster that was immediately hotfixed the next day, with nerfs to her base stats, Q, E, and ult. It took much more than this to contain the monster Riot unleashed, though. While she has received multiple nerfs with literally every part of her kit being heavily toned down over the course of time, 2 back-to-back patches did the most damage to Aurelia's reign as the queen of no counterplay. Patch 9.2 hit Aurelia hard, with her losing the bonus damage against shields from her passive, her Q damage against minions significantly dropping, and the biggest blow of them all, her ult losing its disarm effect. With this change, enemy ADCs that got clipped by her wall were no longer rendered useless, and could get in some damage on Aurelia before she reached them in a fight. 2 weeks later, 9.3 reeled in Aurelia's ability to mitigate all damage coming at her, making her Ws only able to reduce incoming physical damage. This meant mages could still potentially blow her up in fights when she wasn't itemizing specifically against them. Speaking of counterplay, do you often feel like you struggle with certain matchups, find it hard to deal with lane bullies? At ProGuides.com, our team of Challenger-level coaches are ready to help you with that and more, instantly. We also have live classes from the best instructors, and full courses from your favorite pros to help you learn your champ and role better so that you can climb and achieve your goals for the season. Alright, let's get back to the video. While the last 2 champs took a multitude of nerfs and adjustments to be put down, one champion went from S tier to the worst pick of all time with a single patch. Season 1 Evelynn saw practically no play at high levels of competition, but was an extreme pub stomper with many less skilled players who refused to play around pink wards, demanding for the champ to be squashed. The result was one of Riot's biggest fails at balancing a champ of all time. Where most people bring up balance issues with insane win rates, oppressive kits, and no counterplay, the results of Evelynn's nerfs birthed the worst champion of all time. In fact, the only champion considered anywhere close to this release was Syndra, but that was largely due to bugs. The nerf itself seemed simple in nature. Eve's first attack out of stealth was changed from a stun to a slow. This, coupled with her losing some attack speed and healing on her old ult, resulted in a pathetic win rate that dipped as low as 34% in ranked games. Eve was so bad that people were harassed in Champ Select for locking her in, and some claimed they were banned just for picking her and performing poorly while actually trying their best. The nerf was so bad and long-lasting that Eve didn't recover until her rework a full year later. What's worse than a champion with crazy high burst damage, a slow, and mobility? The same champion having a point-and-click silence to remove any potential ability to trade back. When people realized how OP Kassadin was and started abusing him, his ban rate reached a staggering 95%. Just securing Kassadin in a ranked game was enough to make people dodge, or tilt if a game actually went through. After multiple failed attempts at balancing him, Riot tried to instead adjust his kit. This adjustment included two major nerfs, changing his silence out for a magic shield, and removing the mana refund for his ult hitting an enemy champ, along with several other changes. And just like that, the former god of mid lane became a joke. He didn't really have any winning lanes, and his late game wasn't the terrifying menace it was before. After a few buffs putting him into a healthier spot, Riot immediately turned the tables a second time, hobbling Kassadin by nerfing his ult range from 700 down to 450. At the time, instead of calling it Rift Walk, people referenced the pathetic range by calling it Rift Hop or Rift Limp. While the range was buffed by 50 the next patch, it would take this and many other buffs for the next few years to try and recover the damage Riot had done to the Voidwalker. So far, these champs have all had their abilities toned way back, but what about a fighter so overpowered that Riot had to take out the most iconic part of his kit, stripping him of his very identity? Immediately following Aatrox's rework, Riot made the same mistake they often do. They buffed a new champ before people learned how to properly play him. Once people got past his learning curve, Aatrox was a top lane terror. He stomped almost every single 1v1 matchup, and he had a ridiculous mid-game power spike, being able to pretty much 1v5 at 3 items. While this was an attempt to yet again bring down his dominance in pro play, the specific nerf we're looking at here isn't just about the effect the nerf had on his power as a champion. After more than 6 years of being a bloodthirsty fighter that thrived in battle, Riot took away what was considered the core of Aatrox's very being, his revive. Initially tied to his passive on release, his rework saw this ability move to his ult. Removing Aatrox's ability to come back to a fight a second time in battle left people upset, with many claiming he wasn't even the same champion, dubbing him Boris the World Ender. It's one thing to nerf a champion's strength, but nerfing their existence itself is on a whole other level. Now, imagine being run down by a tank who can't be CC'd while they permanently slow you and heal through what little damage you can do to them. Nowadays, he is an early game-focused jungler that falls off as the game goes on, but in the early seasons of League, Olaf was a ticking time bomb. The later the game went on, the harder he was to deal with, and eventually, he would just take over the whole game, forcing an entire team to try to rotate and deal with him. The problem with Olaf was that he had the same general abilities he does now, but with very high base damages, a slow on his axe that didn't decay, and his ult gave armor pen and damage reduction on activation. The meta build on him was to go full tank, but even with no real DPS items, he did as much damage as any other carry, making him a threat that was impossible to deal with. Riot reacted by nerfing the infamous Atma's Impaler and Warmog's combo, while also completely trashing Olaf's abilities. He went from such a strong point to being practically unviable in just one patch, and his treatment became so well known that the phrase "getting Olaf" even spread to other games like Dota 2. In Season 2, Diana's release stuck a solid landing, with the fighter-esque assassin finding great success in the middle lane. 2 patches after her release, she received minor nerfs, but continued to dominate most games when played well. A few months later, what looked like small changes on paper completely killed her. 30 damage off her Q, a small radius reduction to her W, and range nerfs to both her E and ult was all it took to drop Diana's win rate by a staggering 12% overnight, plummeting all the way to 39%. It was so bad that she was immediately buffed the following patch, but she never really recovered and remained a situational pick at best until her mini rework several years later. Thanks to her insane sustain, crazy dueling power, and ability to push multiple lanes late game thanks to a low cooldown global teleport, release Reksai was a powerhouse, able to be played top, middle, and jungle. Between her initial release and her mini rework that turned her global tunnel into a long-range execute, Reksai received a single buff to how often she could use individual tunnels, but a total of 13 nerfs to various parts of her kit. While she was never put completely out of commission, she belongs on the list just for that huge 13-to-1 buff to nerf ratio. After his VGU, Gangplank caught on very quickly as one of the best top lane champs of all time. Tanks, bruisers, and mages alike all had troubles laning against the pirate, and not even the best hyper carries outscaled him. At Season 5 Worlds, he had a 100% presence rate, and in the 4 games he got through, he smashed the competition, winning each time. He spent over a year being nerfed consecutively, including losing his ability to hold 5 barrels, and their 60% armor pen being lowered to 40%, totaling in at 10 nerfs in a row before ever seeing a favorable change. Looking at GP today, he is nowhere near as formidable as he was immediately following his rework. To round out our list, we're looking at a champion that has received nothing but nerfs since his release. While his nerfs haven't even come close to removing him from the top tier of ADCs, Aphelios earns his spot on this list for the sheer number of times Riot has chipped away at his numbers to no avail. Aphelios' guns have seen over 20 different nerfs, yet he still remains a top-tier pick in both competitive play and solo queue. It's worth noting that while he has received a buff, it was a global increase in base HP and health growth that all marksmen got on 10.11, and you can easily expect to see more nerfs headed his way. And that is it for our top 10 most nerfed champions. Please do remember to let us know what champ you think needs to be gutted in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on tier lists, upcoming changes, the best champs to climb, and other great content like this. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next video.